Hello?
Hello, Daudi.
Yes, hello. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can see you.
That's good.
I can hear you.
Can everyone hear
Val.
me and see me? Sorry,
Hi,
I was
Valerie.
just... Yes.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Good, good. Very well, thanks.
That's good.
Oh my goodness, what happened there?
I don't know.
Hello, somebody can see me? I'm not sure.
Oh, I saw you before, Janeri, and then yeah. Now there's a...
Voilà.
There's a funny phone. Okay.
Yes, we're here.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Good.
How am I looking?
Good.
Who cares?
Everyone's good.
Yes.
Stable.
This is how we
Yeah. I'm at a birthday party, so
Oh no.
I had
You have to take time out.
No, I'm visiting at the party, so I'm not in charge.
Okay.
Which means I'm here for the call.
You can rejoin it as soon as we finish.
Yeah, for sure.
Janira, you okay? You can see and hear everyone?
Yes, now everything is okay. I tried to put the back out, but it's not. I don't know how it's worked this application, so I am not able to.
I don't think
I'm traveling, so that's why I'm not in my gallery. But no problem.
Yeah, it's a strange web-based application that they've chosen for the fair. So we've had some trouble with it.
All right.
Zoom would have been much easier.
Well, I mean, even what is it? Google Meet has been very simple. So, but anyway, we're here now. It doesn't matter. Shall we? Do you have kind of an overriding arch for your questions? What is the? You're going to go with a statement of some kind, or like a provocation.
So this is how I'd like to run it.
Mm-hmm.
You've all received the brief. Which is in broad outline, the topic, and then a series of questions. So I'd like to go in sequence, and each of you speak to those issues and that set of questions to kick us off in turn. So I'd like to start, Valerie, with you.
Okay.
And then go to Janire and then Daudi. And if you could spend maximum 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, addressing the issues in the brief. I will introduce each of you separately. Just give a little background and a bit of your bios. And then after each of you have responded to the brief and those questions, we'll open it up for an internal Q&A between the three of us. So I'll direct some questions and things that have come up in your input, and then we'll spend the last 15 minutes or so opening it to the floor. The format works as follows. I will be able to see each of the questions that come in or comments that come in as the host and the moderator, and I'll then direct them as appropriate to, if they're questions to a particular individual or they're general questions, I'll direct them. And that can be done at any stage during the session. So we needn't, I'll when I introduce the session, when we open up in 9 minutes, I will make that clear and just introduce the session generally, and then hopefully questions will come in during the session as well as at the end, in response to all of your different inputs.
And everything's being recorded, right?
Everything is being recorded. The recordings of the whole session are only available after 24 hours.
Okay.
So there'll be a link.
Sorry, I'll just get my son to say hi.
Link which I can send out to all of you to distribute to your people.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Okay. Now
you disappeared, James. James, I can't see you. Does Janiri and Daudi, can you see James?
No. I don't see him.
No. Okay.
How's that? Am I back?
No, there's just a black square. Now you're back. Yeah, you're back.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's my status is different in the session, so when we go live, I think it'll be okay.
Okay.
Cool.
You guys are all members in good standing of the AAGA, am I correct?
I think so. So far.
Yeah.
Because it's just something that I can use in the introduction.
Very much so.
Talk a little bit about that in terms of your bona fides for the topic. So if you don't mind, I will introduce that.
Can you hear me well with this? I think it's better to be, yes, okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Janira. Are you okay? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, all right. Any other questions from you guys before we kick off? We've still got a few minutes.
Could you summarize the brief, the questions? I'm on my phone, so just to refresh.
Maybe you can copy paste the questions into the chat.
No, I can't do that.
You can't.
I can't do that because then all the attendees will see the brief.
All right. So I will just read it out to you. So basically, whatever the juggernaut of African contemporary art, is it a vogue or is it a sustainable growth market? What are the issues around African art accessing Western markets? What are the issues around gallery system and how it is changing, I assume, on the continent? What about art auctions for African art? Or what about online dealing? And how has it impacted African art?
Sorry, Valerie, can I interrupt there?
Yeah.
Because if Daudi does need, I'd just like to point to a couple of things that you might all want to think about in the brief.
Yeah.
Give me a second. All right. So the overarching brief is about the sustainability of African art being either a niche market or a market segment in major global markets. Okay, so we've seen an explosion of interest in African art certainly in the US, where there's a distinction drawn between African American art and art from Africa, but it remains the case that African art is in the vast majority of African art is exported to those major metropolitan markets and doesn't circulate in an economy in Africa itself. So the sustainability. So we'll
be disagreeing with you. We'll be disagreeing with you, James, and I'll just start with the disagreement, and I'll let my colleagues give you, because we don't live in South Africa, so we will so I'll be disagreeing with you, which is fine because it'll create a really nice conflict and context for.
Okay, Valerie, sorry to interrupt you there. The format is not going to be you disagreeing with me because I'm the host. Okay, so we're not going to have like a.
I know, but I'm allowed to have a different opinion to you.
No, of course you are. Yes, of course you are.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is that
you respond to the brief however you want to respond to the brief. Right. And that opens up the discussion at the end of the session, and then hopefully the people who are attending will respond to that as well. But it's not going to be like a back and forward while you guys are talking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, sorry, just let me get it up again. So yeah, it's essentially about the dynamic between African art and the major Western art markets, how the gallery system is changing. So there's been a lot of talk about artist self-representation in the gallery system. And as Valerie pointed out, art auctions and African art, there's a lot of attention been paid to major African artworks in Sotheby's and Christie's and Phillips in the US and Europe. And then lastly, how does online art dealing affect the African art market globally? So those are essentially the questions, the fields for discussion. And, you respond to them in the ways that you experience and you think from your positions. That's what we want, and that's why you are the people on the panel, because you all have a unique perspective on those questions.
All right.
Right.
So yeah, we're counting down.
Yeah,
so
we've got 2 minutes. We've got 2 minutes to go live.
How does it work the same way as Zoom when you just let everyone in, or you have to let people in?
It's not quite the same as Zoom, but we go live at the advertised time, which is in 2 minutes. I make us live as the host. So I'll just let you know, and then we go live and I'll conduct the introductions. We have got people who have started arriving. So in the what would be the lobby if this was Zoom or MS Teams, which I seriously hope it would have been, but it isn't.
How have the talks been going so far?
We had a very good talk yesterday. Not a huge attendance, but there was an audience, and it went really well, which was the investment talk. And then on opening night, the VIP opening night, we had a lovely chat, which was well attended, on the milestones for the South African organizations, so the galleries and studios and the artist press. And that was really, there were some technical issues, but it went really well. It was largely connectivity issues. So there are, well, I mean, that's kind of par for the course in this format. But yeah, so they've been really good. They've been really good so far. There was one live talk in between, which was about art finance, alternative art finance. And I think that went well. I don't know. I haven't heard about the audience for that or feedback, but it seemed to go well. Okay, guys, we're about to go live. So good luck, and we'll chat through the session.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for clocking in to our session on Pan-African art, the Pan-African art markets, and the position of Pan-African art in the current global art market. We're joined today by three people who are quite uniquely positioned to talk us through the issues. I'll get to those introductions in a moment. My name is James Say. I'm the curator of the Talks program for the Durban Art Fair 2021. The program for the talks this year and the fair as a whole, which is South Africa's first hybrid art fair, part live, part online, is generously sponsored by iToo Art Insure. There is a click through to their website that is currently on screen. And Art Insure have been insuring art collections for all the way from museums to private collections for the last 10 plus years. So for more details, please click through on the link on screen. Our panel today is comprised of gallerists, not only gallerists, but gallerists in the main from all over Africa. And they bring, as a result, a unique perspective to the African art market that is not South Africa, which has certain different characteristics to the somewhat parochial view at times of only being focused on the South African market, which has been common over time. So it's providing us with a view on how African art elsewhere in the continent has changed and developed, particularly recently when African art has developed as a significant niche in metropolitan art markets in the US and Europe. But there are attendant issues with that, with it being seen as a niche market. And hopefully our panelists will enlighten us as to their experience and views of that development and the changes in that market. I will introduce each of the panelists individually. All three are, as I mentioned, gallerists from different African countries. Our common thread, one of the common threads between all three, is that all three galleries that are represented by our panelists belong to an innovative new organization called the African Art Galleries Association, a collective aimed at promoting African galleries' interests across the continent and developing markets in Africa itself for African art. So as I mentioned, I will be introducing each panelist individually. We're going to start with Valerie Kabov, who is the co-founder and director of First Floor Gallery in Harare in Zimbabwe. Has been represented on various South African art fairs in recent years and has been quite prominent in a lot of those art fairs over the last while, so well known in the South African art market. But Valerie has a background in curation and in law, I believe you started out with. A law degree, is that right, Valerie? But has been involved in the industry and is a leading light and a prime mover in the African Art Galleries Association initiative. So it's a pleasure and a privilege to have you here, Valerie, speaking with us. And over to you for a rundown on the topics as I've sketched them out.
Thanks very much, James. For very kind words, and this is an incredibly expansive topic, and I would like to add a little bit to my background is also I'm also a cultural economist who's been analyzing art markets in general globally for more than 20 years. So when I look at African contemporary art, I look at it in the context of developments in global art markets for several decades. So with this in mind, when we talk about sustainability of African contemporary art, we cannot be speaking about it as a new movement. First Floor Gallery Harare was founded in 2009, right? So, and over the last decade, we've been watching people talk about, the hype, the new development, the juggernaut of African contemporary art. But 10 years is quite a long time, right, for any fashion to become a little bit more than a fashion. More than that, we really need to be addressing the fact that in terms of international engagement, we're only just at the start. If among Daudi and Janiri, like my colleagues on the panel today, we have seen, even in our practices as galleries, the number of galleries on the continent expanding, right, for over the last decade. And we're still not at the stage of there being a gallery in every country on the continent that operates internationally. On a continent of 1.2 billion people and 55 countries. So I think this is a really critical thing to bear in mind, that in terms of potential and sustainability, we've only just scraped the surface. The fact that art will always be with us is not only inevitable, it's manifest through human history, so it's not going away anywhere, right? So the issue that we're looking at right now is actually what you have outlined before is where is it going to go in terms of the balance and what is the sustainability. One of the crucial things is to also notice that, again, and I'm sure Daudi and Janiri will speak to this from their context, is the fact that the local markets for contemporary art on the continent are also just beginning to grow. So this is a major distinction from us in South Africa, which has maintained a parochial market, which was actually quite sequestered for decades and quite racially segregated, whereas we all operate in countries with Black majorities and empowered Black majorities who are only just developing their financial stability and power bases, which sort of span a different historical trajectory. And I think each Janiri and Daudi will speak to that. So that is a really important moment to articulate, is that art, contemporary art, especially contemporary art as an investment, contemporary art as a growth category, contemporary art as a cultural asset, is something that is only emerging for local audiences, and this is a really important, and it's an important progress that is being made that will help stabilize our market, right? So you have correctly articulated that a lot of interest so far and that has driven the market for African contemporary art has been from the West. However, what you have neglected to address is the fact that there's also growing interest from Southeast Asia and China towards art on the continent, which actually creates an interesting balancing act. So we're actually in a highly dynamic market environment and we as actors, as galleries on the continent, are playing an active role in creating agency and authenticity in this market. So this is a really, really exciting situation, and something that is, we're building history, and we're making history for contemporary art on the continent every day, and we're very conscious of our role in this. So with this in mind, in terms of changes to the gallery system, I think what you have outlined is actually more relevant and more opposite to South Africa rather than our context. In our context, we haven't had a gallery system in Zimbabwe as such, and it's very difficult to speak of gallery systems in countries where there may be only one or two or three galleries that represent artists internationally or truly represent. So the nature of representation is still an educational process for the community of artists. We're still building that. And what we're building in our context is actually, and this is what First Floor Gallery has done, is develop very different approaches to representation to the standard Western models, because our environment does not enable us to operate in a, arm's length detached model in our context, in a context where materials are scarce, education is under par in terms of art, and access to a lot of basic infrastructure is also extremely difficult, if not unavailable entirely. So the changes to the gallery systems are the changes that we're making in our context by developing what I would call environmentally responsive gallery systems. So that is something a little bit different to what you're discussing about artists representing themselves. Insofar, and I will just skip to online context. Yes, the online environment is interesting, and I think a lot of, it's become more interesting for South Africa during the lockdown, but for most members of the African Art Galleries Association, most galleries on the continent, being active online and operating in a remote context has been part and parcel of our practice since the outset, because we just had to, because most of us operate in environments where we don't get a lot of, foot in the door trade, to our galleries. A lot of our collectors are remote from us, as you have already said. Right. So operating in an online context is something that has been part of our practice for a long time. And it's just become a bit more amplified and a bit more professionalized as other people have been jumping on board internationally and recognized. So that's kind of my position, or what I feel is the situation in the market. And then to speak, get back to the idea of primary and secondary markets. Well, this is interesting and correct that there is there's been an emergence of contemporary African, modern and contemporary departments in Bonham, Sotheby's, now Piazza. There's also Art Curial, but we also have had auctions on the continent, both in Nigeria. Then there's the East African Art Auctions in Nairobi, run by our colleague Danda Jerolimic, and we have contemporary works being sold by Strauss & Co., Aspire & Co. In South Africa. So there is a difference and a balancing act. I think what you're speaking to is perhaps the participation or inclusion of African contemporary artists in contemporary auctions that are not sector specific. I think that's completely appropriate, because if a work is, and that speaks to normalization and acceptance of contemporary art on the continent as contemporary art as is. And I think that's terrific. I think it's wonderful, and it also enables artists from the continent to to achieve prices and price recognition among their peers internationally, which is something that we fight for very hard as galleries on the continent, because the prices for African artists are still below average, although we are dealing with an interesting anomaly where prices for emerging African artists are actually above average as compared to their peers internationally. And that's kind of a little interesting anomaly. If you read the UBS Art Basel Art Market Report, I think it's from 2020, they sort of observe this kind of little anomaly. So we're at a really interesting dynamic moment with an enormous amount of potential. There is an incredible amount of enthusiasm, optimism, especially as other, our local audiences and as local collectors on the continent jump on board. And growth is the only way forward. We have institutions opening up across the board. There is and this is all actually is being bolstered by, by mainstreaming of contemporary art, as it were. And if we look at popular culture, from art being, contemporary art becoming very, very common in television series and films, we're seeing like a globalized awareness of all contemporary art. And so I think this is a really robust and positive moment, and something that we're working hard to support and maintain sort of, I guess, leverage inside, so that we're not, as galleries that are practicing on the continent, are able to, benefit from and may give the most advantage to and the biggest voice to authenticity in terms of art production. So with this in mind, I'm just going to, I guess, hand over to Janire.
Wonderful. Thanks you, Valerie. There's lots of questions that raises, which we'll get to. Our next speaker is Janire. Bilbao from Spain initially, who has been moved to Luanda in 2011, Janira, and opened a gallery there after having been in the communications and advertising industries for some time. Opened a gallery there, MOVART, in Luanda in 2015. And has since expanded the gallery to Lisbon. So it's an interesting recolonization strategy there. And yeah, Janira is going to give us the Lusophone perspective, we hope, on these questions.
Yes.
Over to you, Janira.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank to TAF organization, to you, James, to select me, and all the association that we are working together with Valerie and Daudi, because it's making our life easy and we don't feel sometimes alone in this mission. I will say mission because sometimes it's become really something like it's like more a dream than real. Nowadays, as our first question say, I don't think it's a vogue. African art is not an art movement. For me, what it's happening is like finally these 1.2 billion people having visibility, and that's the difference, as Valerie says, with the past. You know, sometimes the artists were there, the power of their pieces were there, but people in Western Europe or America didn't know. But now we are getting close to the biggest museums, and that this changed everything. And sometimes this is coming to stay. It's not going to change anymore. Of course, the artists are coming and go. The good will remain, but the origin is also, there is not like a kind of African art, like a type of art. It's more like the difference between them is the origin, but not the result. I mean, I have in my gallery photography, sculpture, painters, and no one of them has nothing in common unless the origin. And as you know, I choose to work with the Portuguese-speaking countries, artists of Africa, because they have very close story. Like, I mean, the discolonization was very close. It was all around 75. And my artists, actually, many of them has lived this situation, these hard moments in their lives, the war, and it's something that they reflect in their work. That's why it's a big connection between them, but no in the art itself. Also, about the African art accessing major Western art markets, what I believe is like African art it's been led, is true, by the Afro-American artists first, and they kind of take the others with them, you know. And it's true that something is happening in Europe now, that with ACA, with 154, and with TAF in Africa, with Cape Town, Johannesburg, Lagos. It's a movement that is creating, but is it's been supported also by big fairs, because we start with 154. Actually, was our first art fair internationally in New York, but now we are invited already to Arco and Telescope, in largest fairs in the world. And I know also Freeze has been interested in many of the artists that we actually know. So it's something that it's coming. Is not vogue. It's something. It's really happening. The gallery system and how it's changing. Actually, I have to say that COVID has been, make us suffer a lot, in my case at least. And this crisis make impossible us to show our works to the public, to move, and to even a situation in Africa, for me, at least in Angola, in Mozambique, there wasn't many possibility for them to even work. So it's been a very hard 2 years, but it's true that makes somehow the galleries more, be more online. The selling platforms online, like Artsy or others, help us to be more into the same market, everyone, and democratize somehow the art even if become a little jungle, because now everybody's there. It's very difficult now to see. I don't know. I have the feeling that it's many people on the same platforms, and even if good, it's sometimes difficult to find what you are looking for. Myself, I am trying to look for an artist, and it's very difficult to get to the artist that I'm looking for, because you get confused and lose the focus. About the art actions and African art, what I realized lately, as Valerie says, action houses has been always like a key actor in the secondary market, but it's looking like it's changing lately, and they are more focused now, or are getting inside of the primary market, and somehow it's dangerous for the artists, because then we just lose our power as a gallery, because we are trying to work with the artists in their career, and somehow it can be kind of getting into the same moment, because it's supposed to be good to start with the artists, work together, and at one point you start to go in the secondary market. So it's a change coming there. We don't know exactly how it's going to happen. And how was online art dealing affected African art globally? I already say somehow like it's a tool and help us a lot in the democratization of the art. But I still think that we need to see the art physically, like to be appreciated. So art first is still interesting, but it's true that after COVID, even we are like the galleries are more like independent, in the sense that we can choose better which art first we want to go, because before it was like a very, very big power on the art first, and sometimes galleries we were forced to go, and now we are more like as we are dealing globally online, we are more independent, let's say, from the first. So that's my apportation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janire. That's wonderful. Our final speaker on the panel for our initial set of inputs, is Daudi Karungi from Uganda. Daudi has been a practicing artist for a long time, but is also a major gallerist, having started his gallery, First Art, in 2002 it was. Daudi, is that correct?
Yeah. Hello?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Give me a second. I've lost you.
Oops.
Sorry, my apologies. And also, very interestingly, which you might perhaps want to touch on in your input here, Daudi, is your arts and culture journal, Start, which I believe is still going.
Yeah.
Which is always an important correlative to the success of a regional art scene, that it has some critical and academic framework to it. So starting a journal is always an encouraging thing, and its sustainability is also a good sign. But Daudi, over to you with a view from East Africa.
Yes, hello everyone. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Can you hear me well?
All good, yeah. All
good. You're frozen on my side. It always happens when I'm on calls. But I'm happy to be here, and I think it's very important to have these conversations about the art scene, especially contemporary African art scene, and therefore its interest and its surge in interest. The question of whether it's a vogue or is it sustainable, I would say that it is sustainable. I have followed a lot of things that happen in the world, for instance, from economic development to, I don't know, whatever happens in the world. Somehow, the last place that it manifests is in this continent. So in most cases, the reason why it manifests in this continent is because there's no other place to go. We've heard of the art in Europe. We've had art in the US. There was a moment of the US, and then, or was it Europe and US? And then, of course, South America, Asia, China, probably India at some point. And somehow this is the inevitability. And today it is Africa. But how it
Daudi, you're frozen.
Yeah.
Can you hear us now?
Oops.
Let's give him a moment, see if he can reconnect.
Go, Daudi.
Hello. Sorry,
No problem. We can hear you.
I'm in Kampala, so excuse me for the internet situation. But some of the so some of there's some individuals that started some of this awareness, and like Janine mentioned, the question of the lack of awareness, and people who were doing revenue, the Njamis and all this back in the day when in the 90s, and then there was a lot of work done also by curators like the late Okwi and so on. And that kind of activism or activity raised interest. But then I think for me, the real point when I realized that this is here and is here to stay is when there was a Venice Biennale in 2015, and curated by Okwi, the first Black. And I remember that was the first time I saw so many Black artists or African artists, in a show like Venice. And that plus then art fairs. I remember we did our first art fair in 2015, same year. I think a lot of galleries joined Joburg Art Fair around 2016, and from that moment, I think there was all these dedicated contemporary African art fairs. And I think those art fairs, because they're dealing with the market, they brought a lot of they pulled in, they swayed collectors to the art, and because they were dedicated art fairs of African art, it meant that people started slowly to pick interest. So this is about 2016, 6 years, or what is it, 5 years ago. So it is here to stay because there's been a lot of things that allowed this to happen. So you have the art fairs, and then you have the internet, and then you have social media, and then you have movements like Black Lives Matter, and you have things that made people kind of interested in Africa. And you must give credit to the Black American community, collecting community, because also with them, there was not enough money in that community until recently. Like, let's say they made money in the last 30 years, and they could afford actually to support a market. So the dynamic changed, and then there was the movements of Black Lives Matter. Then there was internet, so people could go on Instagram and find out, whatever they wanted to find out. And then it led to, then recently, of course, the COVID situation might have been a negative in many ways, but was probably a very big positive for bringing out the news of art from Africa. I think that's when we saw some really big changes in terms of African art prices and being known. of course, at the same time, because of all of those things, there is a lot of Africans in our countries that are starting to pick interest in this thing called contemporary art, but not just to beautify their homes, but to collect and to invest and to do things like that. Some of my earlier collectors, they were Black Nigerians or South African, who, when I spoke to them, they were telling me about they want to build museums, they want to build residency programs, and the like. So I don't think, and then now I've also spoken to a few European collectors who used to collect Western art and now, collect only African art. We've had situations of British collectors who have sold their entire Western collection and invested in the African art collecting. So all these things are not by mistake, but that is the effect. But the question of what will it stay is, I say it will stay because the art that we are talking about is very powerful. It is like something we have never seen before. All the great art that is being desired from Africa, it is not by mistake or by luck or by some guy had some money and promoted this artist. It is because it has staying power. It is because it's powerful. But so what the sustainability therefore means, for as many artists that have not yet been discovered, that is for as much art that will come from stories that will come. Of course, if they don't copy each other and do the same things as others. But even then, there will still be some who will, pop out in very special ways. And that leads me to the market, the gallery systems. Our gallery systems on the continent, and I think Valerie mentioned, they are designed out of need. There's a lot of lacking pieces or missing pieces in our galleries, apart from South Africa, of course, where an artist cannot buy some paint and there's a lot of missing things, the shipping, insurance, and all these things that really lack in this continent. Of course, those things are starting to slowly come in, and they're starting to be part of what of joining our ecosystems. And of course, the bigger issue here for me, in terms of gallery systems, African gallery systems, is that there's still the issue of when a gallerist makes an artist pop from this continent, they're very likely to be contacted by any other gallery in Europe or in the US or even South Africa, asking them to join. And the issue with that is that it kind of demoralizes the gallerist who has made that, and it kind of kills the gallerist. And without the gallerist, there is no. It's harder to identify these artists. Like the artists exist around systems. So if there's no systems of how they are going to bring their work to market, then it's a jungle. So I can't speak specifically about the gallery systems because they lack, and like somebody said, you have one gallery in a country, or in terms of an international gallery, and then you have most countries without even galleries. I've just been in West Africa, and I was in a country trying to find a gallery that I could not find. But then again, there was a Biennale going to happen there, but then there were no galleries. So, it meant that maybe the players are not even local, and that could be a problem because it's like a siphoning from the continent, which perhaps one needs to avoid in this day and age. And then, of course, there's a question of art auctions, and I am personally kind of mixed about this idea. I always thought about auctions as places where the secondary, those who bought art go to sell art to each other. It was always a place for me where art that you cannot find, or is too, that you cannot find, so sometimes the artist is dead. This is the place you go to find that art. But today there's auctions that sell the art of the artist that started last year, and they're selling the artwork that was made this year, in January, and it's being sold in March. And I don't see the sustainability of that kind of process. I don't know what the aim is, in a sense, because I think, in my view, that we are still to grow this contemporary art market and interest, we are still at the investment level. I think it's the point where collectors should buy art from African artists, whether they buy it directly or through galleries, that's really up to them. But the point right now should be investing in this kind of work. And like you said, to speak of Start Journal, this is something that we started in 2007, so that we can document art activity. Because one of the lacking points in our history, African art history, is that there's no documentation, there's no written information, especially information written locally. There's a lot of books about Ugandan artists in Germany, but there's none about Ugandan artists in Uganda, or in English for that matter. So we started Start Journal to document and give context and information about these artists, so that years later, when you want to find out a certain artist, you will go to this journal and you find this information. So one of the drawbacks that we have today is that collectors today, because it's a new era market, don't know much about art from artists from Africa. So they end up being misled sometimes by the art advisor, who will say that, because the art advisor in my case is a person who knows the artists and about the art world and knows the collectors or the rich people. So they will say, hey, this is the artist that you should buy, not necessarily because they are the ones worth buying, but because they're actually the artists that they know, because they know them, because they went to one country in Africa at some point and they found out this artist and they went party and they enjoyed and they said they were artists and they seem to like the art and they say, oh, this is an artist, and therefore that artist becomes the most sought after artist. But so there has to be a lot of writing about art. There has to be a lot of talking about art in today, and a lot of support behind real talent, so that we can sort of grow a more sustainable market. And of course, like we've all said about African Art Galleries Association, these efforts are to build a really strong support system for this market. Because if this market is loose, a few individual players around, it will die just like that. But the more of these strong units that are being created, and others that we are part of, they create this sort of backing for this industry. And that's, I guess, what I can say for now about these issues.
Fabulous. Thank you, Daudi. That's valuable input indeed. Okay, there's a couple of issues that have come up both in the chat and that I want to put back to the panel. Let's start with that before we get to the point that's been raised by one of our attendees. And this is open to all three of you, and hopefully all three of you have touched on it in your input there. and can respond to this. The question of African art having a continental identity. So African art is a thing; it's an entity. When, you know, in fact, it has all sorts of different characters that might be regional, that might be national, that might, you know, relate to individual traditions in particular countries, or even within a group of artists, or coming out of a different history. How do you see this in the context of an art market which is truly globalized and that tends to characterize the markets in which it deals, either via the gallery system or via auctions, as coming from a particular region in the world? So, like, you know, Asia or the Americas, or, you know, we've now got the quite well-defined concept of the global South as an actor on the global art stage. But these are all you know, assignations, descriptions that specify art as being homogeneous in a particular region. How do you see this from the African point of view?
So, can I just pipe in for 2 seconds? So this was a huge debate in 2012 that a lot of us were having around 2012, start of 2013, when 154 was about to launch. And these issues were rather hotly debated at the time. Some of us have that, you know, that memory as whether or not we wanted to be in a ghetto or not. In the end, the issue was this: is there a political impetus in the market to do something? Yes. Is you know, there is no political independence without economic independence, to paraphrase Kwame Nkrumah. And that is really enormous. Like, if you're economically disempowered, you don't have agency, right? So being engaged in the market. We live in a world where, you know, where political and national identities are relevant to commerce, right? That is, and we're living in a world where identity politics are relevant to everything. So I guess geographical location becomes irrelevant to one's ability to engage with the market, whether we like it or not. To give you an example, like Middle Eastern galleries exhibit at Art Basel, Hong Kong, right? Because technically they're all in Asia. Now let's agree that, and as well as Indian galleries. So the idea of supporting your own is somehow implicit in market strength. So I don't see this, you know, I don't see this as disappearing in any sense. And it is something that we're working on in terms of articulating the need to support your own on an economic basis, rather than in any particular creative basis or any particular visual identity. The visual identity is something that the West or people outside the continent project onto us. It's not something that is, as Janire put it, it's not something that is intrinsic to who we are or what we do or what the artists do. Because let's agree that Addis Ababa is closer to Paris than it is to Cape Town. So the cultural contexts are so incredibly diverse that there is no point in generalizing, except to say this is a valid market category. It is valid for people who want to support us. This is how we may be against capitalism, but this is how globalized market capital works right now. And this is and if we ignore it, we're actually ignoring it to our peril. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, me too. I agree with you. I mean, at the end of the day, mainly in our side, I mean, from the Portuguese speaking countries of Africa, there is even less power going on, less foundation, less collectors. If you say it's not only the language, but sometimes it's make the countries support each other because they see a kind of connection. They see I mean, if you feel like you are alone in an island, like sometimes in Angola you feel it, you know, it's very difficult to fight against the other. You just that's why the association, for example, is very important for us, because we have different language, or English is not our main language, French neither, so we are kind of lost in the middle of nowhere. It's difficult for Angola, for example, Angola, Mozambique, Sao Tome, I mean, to be focused and to be in the middle of the same, have the same opportunities, let's say.
Daudi, you're on mute.
We don't listen to you.
Yeah, Daudi.
Daudi, you're on mute. No, we've lost audio on you.
Oh gosh.
No, there you back. Okay, go ahead.
No,
No,
no, you're on mute. We can't hear.
Yes, I was frozen. I don't know why it does that. Sorry, I'll just speak about this African art continental identity. I think I agree with both the speakers on what they say. I think there's a high level of economic development attached to visibility in this case. And like I mentioned earlier, when you talk about India being in Basel or wherever, the economic development of India is really high, as much as there's a lot of poverty, just like in the US. But their economic development is extremely high, and therefore the level of exposure and interest of people into the continent, and therefore the artists out of the continent. I kind of understood the question around it as whether it is the continental identity of African art. And I think that it is not necessarily African art, it is art made by artists on the continent of Africa, in a sense. And that's why it's extremely diverse. It's not African art. I don't think there's such a thing as African art. I think it's art made by the people who live in this country or in this continent, or affiliated to it. And I think it's an identity issue in the sense that you choose to be, how do you describe yourself? You say, I'm an artist from Germany. And they say, okay, you're from Europe. So it is so new, this whole thing in Africa, the new market realization. And a lot of things are going to have, words are going to be defined, the terms. They're going to be fought against. And I remember in the beginning of African art fairs, there was a lot of people, galleries, who were saying, no, we don't want to be known as African art galleries. These are terms that keep changing, but I think it's a journey, it's a process, and things will words will be changed and rediscussed every time.
Cool, great. Very considered. I want to just discuss something in follow-up to that, which is also relevant to our general rubric, which relates to the motivation for establishing and or joining and the goals of, I guess, an organization like the African Art Galleries Association. So, there's obviously a need for some kind of collective organization and action. And as you've described, this is not about a kind of disseminating a homogeneous idea about what African art is as a continental identity. But from the point of view of your membership of that organization, what is the agenda? What do you hope to further and advance in terms of the cause of African art? And this is addressed to all of you. So.
I think Valerie can start.
Really? what can advance?
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, I think we've already addressed issues of infrastructure quite extensively, but I think one of the things that doesn't get spoken about most is the things that empower the artists individually and ideologically, because historically, and that goes to, while we talk about market education, we also need to talk about education of artists. Now, most countries on the continent don't have, with the exception of South Africa, which is second world as opposed to developing world, do not have international quality art schools with graduate degrees. So this is a major stumbling block on numerous reasons. It stops the building of, ongoing building and job creation and retention rates on the continent, because in order to continue their careers or to become, get higher qualifications, a lot of artists need to leave the continent. And then when they come back, if they do come back, they could be frustrated by lack of opportunities. And so I think a lot of our sustainability also is involved in building up our education systems in a way, which means we do need to engage governments or private sector support to build, and to have public-private partnerships that can support, comprehensive infrastructure growth. So as galleries, there's only so much we can do, and and we've done a lot, right? Like look at Daudi. Daudi runs, helps run Kampala Biennale. He runs the Star Journal. He's got a silhouette, a residency program, as well as a gallery that takes part in numerous art fairs. He's built up, an infrastructure around, but that is not the solution. That is not the solution. I mean, as individuals, we've done a lot. As First Floor Gallery, we run an educational project. We have 2 galleries, again, residency programs, enormous amounts of activity. But more needs to be done. And so in a way, part of the job is engaging broader sectors of the population, engaging corporates that will also look at art as part of their legacy, part of an economic and cultural imperative. And this is a major process, because a lot of us, most of us, live in countries where art is not a big priority for our governments, and stimulating art support and public-private partnerships for art development, again, is not a huge priority for our governments, and understandably so, because health and health and infrastructure, roads, electrification takes a huge, are incredibly urgent, right? So I think that is both a challenge and an opportunity, but it's something that we're actively thinking about. And so I will, that's where I'm at right now.
Guys, your own involvement in the organization?
Sorry?
Your own involvement in the organization? How do you see it?
Is it me? Sorry.
Another one, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I think beyond what Valerie says, I think the need to pull together in a group, so that, because we do the same thing and we represent the same agendas for artists or our ecosystems, it becomes important to share, but also to help sort of create policy issue without, not government policy, but to help create some do's and don'ts, perhaps, in how we can operate and come out victorious as galleries. I think that you can't do that alone, and you can't also do it as an international gallery in an international world, because things are different. But at least in Africa, things are kind of similar. Even if you add South Africa, there's there's a lot of similarities in the artists and the galleries and the collectors, that we need to come together and share ideas on how we can grow, help artists better, build better markets, and look out for who is worth working with and who is not, in terms of maybe collectors or institutions for that matter. So it helps in that way. And then,
yeah. So follow what both of them say, and I am thinking also that it's important to be together. We have same problems. Education is one of the biggest issues also for MOVART and for the artists. So as education and foundation and collectors sometimes are the same. So it's good if we at least communicate each other, like share our information. That is gonna make us more strong and be able to be. I mean, to be able to grow all together.
Great. Okay. Tony, we haven't had any questions yet from our attendees, so give people a minute or two to formulate anything if they want to. Bear with us. Any questions from our audience in the chat box?
There's something about kleptocracy, but I think it's a very South Africa specific question. So I don't think.
Yeah, I think it is a separate issue, and at least, I mean, we have touched on it somewhat, but it leads back into that into the repatriation dynamic, which I think is a separate set of issues, and the decolonization of art institutions, certainly in the West, and in places like South Africa, of course. But it is a kind of parallel, but set of questions on its own that demands attention. Yeah, thanks, Richard. If you are online, obviously, but it does indeed is relevant to what we were talking about initially, about that market dynamic particularly between the US and European markets and markets through Africa, where 85%, I think, is the latest figure of art produced in Africa is being auctioned or sold in those major metropolitan markets, where the local markets aren't being developed because, as you point out, Valerie, they don't have the economic basis and infrastructure to do so. So that dynamic exists. Initiatives like the AAGA are addressing those exact tenets. It's a big effort at redress as well. Valerie,
can I make a little point? And I mean, it's something that I've been thinking about and writing a tiny bit about over the last couple of years. Is basically one of the things that we face as galleries, or it's come up in some of my business dealings, is both with collectors and with other galleries internationally, is basically racism. There's no other way of putting it, where there is, and it's racism that operates on numerous levels. So on the one, and it's kind of a really interesting thing for me to be talking about it, because when I first came to Zimbabwe, I was treated as a European, and after more than a decade of working with an African gallery, I've noticed there's been a distinct shift in the way European gallerists or even collectors approach me, because you get treated as somebody from a poor country who doesn't know anything and who's not able to adequately represent artists, or somehow is lacking in competence, notwithstanding my more than 30 years of experience globally. And it's something that is implicit in some of our dealings, where, for instance, it's actually where sometimes you will have collectors push you on prices where we don't. So one of the things that the association is able to give us leverage with is to have, peer support and, reassurance when people say, look, your artists are from Africa, or they're educated in Africa, therefore their prices don't deserve to be X, that an artist and who is an African artist or diasporan African artist deserves to have a higher price because, of course, they're living in London. And those are actually really interesting levels. Or, for example, when we're engaging globally, and you've raised that issue as sort of the category merge, I've certainly written about it, where there's a category merge where there would be a discourse on Black experience in international art market, and everyone who will be speaking about it is in fact African American, as though African Americans are, and to absolute exclusion and erasure of, in fact, 1.2 billion Africans actually on the continent. And I've raised that with organizations, with institutions, and those are some of the issues that we're actually actively dealing with, is the fact that there is still a major element of exclusion that happens in the market context. And it's, even though, we're speaking about this juggernaut, we're speaking about this overwhelming attention. And so one of the reasons that we really need to group together and build solidarity and focus on domestic markets and building up local collector bases, because this gives us force and power and support and grassroots to engage with a global, with a global audience that is still not entirely on our side in that sense, where we're still being told that we need to prove our bona fides, that we need to prove our competence, we need to prove that we are important and valuable every step of the way. So, we might be talking about market issues, but these market issues are still very much steeped in political, ideological, and, decolonial dynamics. So I think that's I think that's important to raise in this context.
I think that's very well put. And it expresses that set of issues very eloquently. Thank you, Valerie.
I'll try.
Guys, anything else to add?
I think it's well said. Janira?
No, I am agreed. It's true that you play in a different, it's difficult to prove every time of this, so every step to prove what you are doing is as professional the others. And the prices need to be the same, but it's true that it's different. I even thought it should be even higher because it's more difficult. So yes, the opposite.
I agree. So a luta continua.
I always say that I guess I believe in the power of great things, because they will always happen. They will always show up. So it's important to continue doing. And I think that there's a lot of ignorance on that side when people question your competence. And I don't think one should therefore succumb to that ignorance. I think that people should continue doing and continue being, at the end of the day, it will even out. I think we just keep pushing and keep grouping up and creating more faults. Yeah.
Exactly. Keep agitating.
Yeah, but for example, our idea to come to Lisbon was mainly to help us on transport, on logistics. Mainly, we have a huge problem in Angola with currency. Currency lose value every day, so it was impossible. It was like if you stay in the market only, you just get out of the international market because you cannot play as the other galleries all around the world, and you cannot pay the same amount to go into the fair. So at the end, you are out just because you cannot manage. So it was a kind of be playing in the international market, put a step in Europe.
Yeah, that's also where collective action helps.
Yeah,
we're problem solving.
The organization.
Yeah,
guys, we can, I think, wrap up. I'd like to thank you all for participating in the discussion. Valerie, Janire,
Thank you.
Daudi. It's been an important discussion, as Richard has pointed out, and I think very valuable. Thank you for those who did attend. We had a small attendance, but nonetheless, very important discussion, and hopefully a corrective to some of the currents, I'm sure, that are even going on at this very fair, but certainly are carrying on around the world. So keep fighting the good fight, and thank you very much for your input tonight. To everyone who's still online, there will be a recording available of the talk after 24 hours. You can, I'm about to put the email address in the chat, that you can send me a message to request a link to that recording. There we go. But it will be available only after 24 hours. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to my panelists again for your time and valuable input. And good night, everyone.
Good luck in the...
Good
Thank
night,
you.
Jenny. Thanks
Bye.
very much. See you guys. Bye.